Okay, Harmeet, same question. You saw me ask the senator. You're out there, you've been defending a lot of people who have been stuck in some of these social media companies, bad practices that they've come out and said things about. What do you think the biggest areas of concern are? Privacy, censorship, anything else?
Well, all of those are big concerns, and I'm afraid that conservatives who like to use these platforms are not aware of how bad it really is. The companies in Silicon Valley, I think a recent study showed that Google employees donated over 95% of the dollars they did in the 2016 election to Hillary Clinton and to Democrats, and less than 5% to our side. And these figures are similar for Facebook, Twitter, Netflix, Amazon, the other big tech companies. And so people are policy. And so if all of those people are so far left, you can imagine that the policies that they draft, the software that they write, that is used for censorship of conservative voices is very much slanted in one direction.
Well, let's go there, that question. Why do we get such liberal outcomes, though? Why is the concentration as you just say? I mean, how do you end up at companies where 95% of the money? Is it their culture from the top? What's going on there?
It's a variety of things. For one thing, Silicon Valley is a very precious little bubble that if you don't live there, you don't know what it is like. But the people who choose to live in California, despite some of the bad things we all know about California, are people who really value that sort of liberal lifestyle, that culture, that progressivism. It is a very blue state. And on top of that, it is mainly young people. That's another discrimination issue here, as most of these tech companies are staffed purely with young people. Mm-hmm. And those people, unfortunately, given today's educational system and with the values they learn in colleges, they're pretty liberal. And so that's the starting point. Then you have their ambitious bosses who started these companies. Google, for example, a fairly young company. These are folks who are planning to be in the Hillary Clinton administration. I mean, there was open weeping and sort of group therapy sessions at Google after the 2016 election. I kid you not, it was really pretty bad.
So some of the people that you've represented, your Google clients, for instance, when they do come out and they talk about this environment and then some of the things that happen inside, you guys have been the subject of incredible partisan attacks from the other side. How do we even find out what's going on in these places when we have this kind of culture where everyone on the left despises anyone who even asks this question?
Well, we don't even have time to get into it here today, but one of the reasons you don't hear about it is because of the arbitration clauses that these companies force these employees to file. They're also required to waive their rights to class action, so we don't see a lot of that. But before that happened in the James Damore case, which I think you're referring to, we were able to tell America in a court filing about some of the horrific things that are going on there. People are being punished within Google for advocating the right to be able to raise their children with traditional gender roles.
Wow.
People are being punished for being people of faith. Conservatives are being demagogued as Nazis. And the most extreme rhetoric you can possibly imagine is being handed out by executives at these companies without any shame or without anything reining them in. And so the same is true to a lesser degree with some of these other tech companies, but James Damore is an accidental hero of the right. He did not intend to champion these causes. He simply pushed back on some of the PC that was being forced on him, and then he was shamed and demagogued, demonized, and publicly humiliated by his bosses.
So that's the culture. Now we know how we get what we get. You heard the senator. Do you agree with some of his approach? How do we fix it? What do we need to do? Do you do something about the Communications Decency Act? Do you do privacy legislation? What would it look like in your world?
Well, all of the above, but to drill down on Section 230 of the Communications Decency Act, there's been a proposal by Senator Cruz that you can still have 230 immunity, but it has to be tied to being a neutral platform. So these tech companies can choose. If you want the immunity that was intended by the original law back in the day when the internet was a new technology, you can have it, but you have to adhere to neutral norms. If you don't want that, and frankly, in many of the recent court filings, Google and Twitter and these other companies have said, we're a publisher. So when they're sued, for example, for allowing terrorists to communicate on Twitter of their terror attacks, they say, well, we're a publisher, so we have a right to control what's on there. Well, if you're a publisher, you should have the same liability of Fox and CNN and Wall Street Journal and everybody else. You got to choose. You can't have it both ways.
But who makes the decision about what is a neutral place, right? I mean, that's one of the problems now, is they say, no, of course we completely fairly enforce these standards. We go after, no, we all know that that's not true. But so who makes that decision that you're neutral?
Well, interestingly, Kim, in recent weeks, these companies are no longer saying that they're neutral. For example, my firm, in conjunction with some other lawyers, filed a lawsuit against Twitter a couple of weeks ago because a radical feminist, who's our client, had the nerve to say men are men and women are women and push back on trans activism. These are facts, people. Whatever you want to believe and be sensitive to trans people, these are facts of science. She said those facts. She was banned permanently. And when questioned about this, the CEO, Jack Dorsey of Twitter, said, well, we can no longer afford as a company and as a society to be neutral on some of these issues. So they're admitting their lack of neutrality, and we should hold them to that standard. I don't think it's that hard, Kim. If we amend the law to say you get the immunity if you are neutral, that can be litigated in the courts.
We had a while back efforts by some of these companies to get conservatives to come together and advise them and tell them what their practice is. Has it made any difference?
Well, first of all, I think that's an entirely fake kabuki theater effort. I do not think it is sincere in any way because, as we can see, the leftward drift continues apace. So, I'll leave it at that. I don't want to say anything about the folks who participate in that.
I want to put the same question to you that I put to the senator, because again, I think as conservatives, we have to think really hard here. We like free markets. We don't like a lot of regulation. So is the question here really something that Washington needs to do this, or do we just need to have more competition out there in the field? Do we need some really bright entrepreneurs who are out there challenging the dominance of these major players? So is that even possible, or do you believe that there is such a thing as a monopoly going on at the moment?
Well, we have a duopoly going on for sure. So in digital advertising, Google and Facebook control like 90% of the digital advertising market. That's a duopoly in my opinion. You have other areas where Google particularly is particularly vertically integrated in controlling the market. So for example, Google controls over 70% of the following four markets. They control 70% plus, I think 73% of the phone market with the Android operating system. They control over 70% of the search market with the Google search. They control over 70% of the browser market with Chrome. And they control over 70% of the video streaming market with YouTube. On top of that, they pay each other, these FANG companies, Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google, they pay each other to promote themselves. So Google pays Apple to have search by Google on the Safari. So you might think these are different companies, but actually they all have cozy relationships with each other.
Yeah, just push back on that one little bit though. If you talk to a true conservative antitrust lawyer, what they'll tell you is it's not enough to be big. Right? Being big is not a crime, and having a huge percentage of market share isn't a crime. You actually actively have to be keeping other people from coming into your market.
Sure.
And do you see evidence that they're doing that?
Absolutely, they are doing that. So the Federal Trade Commission is one of our agencies that already exists and already has regulatory and legal authority from a court decision last year to regulate these companies. Each of the companies I mentioned in the FANG market have been accused of, in the last couple of years, of slowing, of throttling data. So for example, if you're Netflix, they've been accused of throttling data. Amazon actually has a patent on technology that says that when you're in one of their new physical stores, you're not able, in a search result, to find non-Amazon sponsored products. So I think the evidence is ample. We have already government authority to do something about it. Sadly, our government is not doing enough about it to protect us. So the existing laws are plenty to do this. And on your point about, I see a lot of think tanks talk about how, as conservatives, we don't believe in regulation, and as conservatives, we don't believe in too much antitrust.
No, we're careful, just careful. We're careful with it.
We're careful with it, but guess what? Many of those think tanks get substantial contributions from these FANG companies. And so, there is a, whose ox is being gored here, and so I think it is very interesting that a lot of that is not known by the public.
Okay, last question. What's your advice to people out here in the audience about how they deal with this themselves on a day-to-day basis? Those are worried about being shadow banned. Those are ones worried about having their accounts blocked. How do they fight back about this daily?
Well, first, people should document. People should, I think it becomes hard, even though I think as a First Amendment lawyer, I think it's important to protect even the most extreme speech. But if you are one of the most extreme speakers, you're going to have fewer allies. So without self-censoring, I think it is important to build alliances, document these things, speak up in whatever platforms you're able to, and hold your members of Congress and your government accountable for their failure to protect you in the marketplace.
Thank you, Harmeet.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
All right.